Howe ultimately argues that postmodernism and transformationism are not as different as we might at first believe. However, he does examine how they differ in three ways: in epistemology, in how they view the ontology of self, and in their politics. Because epistemology and ontology of self are so closely interlinked, I'm going to handle those two together and then speak to the issue of politics. In terms of epistemology and the ontology of self, there is much that the two camps foundationally agree on. For example, both agree that knowledge is constructed. In Howe's words, for both camps, knowledge must be seen as actively constructed and accordingly as not neutral, but culturally and historically contingent, laden with moral and political values, and serving certain interests and purposes. Also, for both camps, humans are self-creating. They are like-minded in their rejection of the positivist-inspired behaviorist conception of human nature, in which human beings are portrayed as passive recipients of stimuli. That said, the two camps would disagree on how to respond to the question of whether or not knowledge is merely serving certain interests and purposes. For orthodox postmodernists, the response would be largely yes, it merely serves power interests. Knowledge is a mask, and therefore it must be dismantled. Transformationists, on the other hand, would agree that knowledge is a construct, but they would argue that it's nonetheless as good as real. For example, we would all agree that money is a social construct. There's no intrinsic value in the pieces of paper that we exchange, but we nonetheless accept that money has a reality to it. Another place that two camps disagree is whether you can have an identity. For postmodernists, the answer is no. Whether I'm saying I'm a woman, or I'm a Canadian, or I'm stupid, or I'm smart, or I'm funny, these are all conditional, illusory statements. For transformationists, the answer is yes. Even if any statement of identity could be deconstructed, it is nonetheless useful to claim an identity as a resting place. It provides a practical way for us to function in the world. Also, other people will put an identity on us, even if we perceive identity as merely a construct. Even if I say there's no such thing as gender, others will still perceive me as a woman. To quote Howe, for postmodernists, one must be ever wary of the normalizing and sinister influences that social forces have on the formation of selves, and be constantly at the ready to expose, deconstruct, and throw them off. For transformationalists, not all normalizing forces are bad. They are, as it were, resting places for the self, and good ones that education ought to promote. When it comes to politics, there are places where the two camps once again agree. According to Howe, neither transformationists nor postmodernists believe present social arrangements are just and democratic. Both seek to identify social structures and norms that serve to oppress people. Each then embraces deconstruction in this sense. What divides them is the reason for engaging in deconstruction and what comes after it. Taken to an extreme, postmodernists might say that they can't actually propose a new reality once the old one has been deconstructed, because any new norms would be just as ungrounded as the old ones and would simply serve to reify new power structures. Transformationists take issue with this. They believe that we need new concrete visions for what the future will look like. For them, postmodernists duck out of responding to critical questions around how a person might live morally and ethically in the world. Moreover, transformationists argue that it's only the privileged who can reject modernist grand narratives. For example, as a student, you might recognize that what you are being taught in university isn't intrinsically more useful than what you might be taught by your grandmother. However, you nonetheless must learn what is being taught in school if you want the degree. You don't have the choice of rejecting it, and it is only after you have the degree that you might be in a position to launch your critique. You need power to give up power. That being said, it's in a way too easy to stereotype postmodernists as going nowhere. And in fact, there are many postmodernists who don't go to the extreme, but rather try to marry postmodern ideas with transformative goals. Howe points to thinkers like Aronowitz and Giroux, who call for a critical postmodernism, in which the postmodern politics of difference is combined with the modernist struggle for justice, equality, and freedom. Now is when we're beginning to see how postmodernists and transformationists might not be so different after all. Since, in fact, few postmodernists go to the extreme of shunning all transformative visions of the future. At the end of the article, Howe acknowledges that the difference between postmodernists and transformationists may be a difference of degree rather than a qualitative difference. Almost all transformationists do some deconstruction, and almost all postmodernists advocate some form of transformation. In reality, the two camps may exist on a continuum. For example, using the example of female circumcision, Howe points out that even postmodernists who see questions of right and wrong as being relativistic with no clear response would probably come around to denouncing the practice. They would differ from transformationists more in how they denounced it and what steps they took. For example, in considering when to hold their tongues and when to speak, than they would in what they actually ultimately did. Ultimately, the camps may not be as far apart as they seem. Thanks for listening. I realize that in this presentation, I drew on examples from some of my own areas of interest. My goal was to illustrate the article's points by grounding them in concrete examples. But if my examples serve to confuse, please know that we'll have time for comments and questions when we meet on Tuesday. Also, like you, I'm a student. So if there's anything I've said that you see as debatable, let's talk about it when we meet. The goal here is learning, and the goal of pre-recording this session was for us to have more time to engage with the ideas when we meet synchronously. Before I go, though, I want to leave you with some homework so that we can launch right into discussion when we meet. For Tuesday, you will watch a music video of Beck's song Loser, which often has been referred to as postmodern. I personally don't think it's a coincidence that it came out at near the same time as this article in the 90s when postmodernism was quite a hot topic. Please watch the video and come to class prepared to discuss these questions. 1. Why might this song be considered postmodern? And 2. What might Beck be understood to be deconstructing? Thank you. Have a great weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday.